is the second story in a series of 8, and under the main title of Beyond Reality. I'll be reading 5 pages of the story in each video. So don't forget to follow, don't forget to check, don't forget to enjoy. The Jam Breaker by Marie D. Henry, copyright. Dave and his friend Vance decided to take a trip up the Teddybush River to see if they could find peavies and pikes that had been lost during the spring drive of pulpwood and logs. They planned to go the first week of October, for the river would be at its lowest. They would be able to see the peavies and pikes on the river bottom. They had been on the drive that spring, and they knew just where the most peavies would be. They expected to have a good gathering to sell to make extra money. The men who worked in the logging camps were always eager to get these tools to use during the spring drive. October soon came, and the first Monday of the month, they started out on their trip. It was 6 a.m. when Vance knocked on the door at Dave's home. Dave was waiting for him. Shouldering his backpack, he gently closed the kitchen door and asked, "Did you bring enough food for the day?" Vance started away from the door. Then he turned to look back at Dave. "Yes, and I brought the rifle also." "Good." Dave felt the air crisp and sweet in his lungs as he followed Vance's dark figure down that laneway to the road. He did not worry about the darkness. They knew the way to the river, and by the time they got there, he knew that the sun would be well up in the morning sky. They walked along in silence. Dave's thoughts, filled with plans for the money he would get, was not ready for Vance's question. "Remember the fellow who was killed last spring?" The question flashed Dave back to the dreadful day when the logs jammed the river and the boss sent out the man known as the Jam Breaker to remove the log that was the key to holding the logs from moving forward down the river. The memory of it sent a shiver down Dave's spine. He struggled not to let his feelings show in his voice. Yes, the poor fellow never had a chance. Dave wondered if Vance was beginning to wish he had not come along. He tried to detect doubt or fear in Vance's voice, when he spoke again, but he could not. They never did find the body. Dave worked to keep his voice strong, but it cracked a bit despite his effort. No. Vance's question came to him through the darkness. "Do you think we might run across it?" Dave was glad his voice did not betray his feelings at the thought. Likely the bears have found and eaten it by now. There were no more comments from Vance about the man who had been killed, but Dave's thoughts went back to that day as they walked along in silence. They had been driving huge logs down the flooding river. There was a stretch of rough water where the logs got hung up on some big boulders and jammed the river. The logs piled up 10 feet high and right across the river, forming a very effective dam. The water was backed up for a good 2 miles behind it and was flooding over the banks. As the other logs came down the river, they piled up higher and higher, building up the water pressure behind the jam. When this happened, the men had to go out onto the jammed up logs and try and remove the key log. Once the key log was pulled out, the whole thing would roar down the river and some of those huge logs would snap like matches under the pressure. The men working on the jam would run for dear life for shore. Those moving logs did not wait for men to get out of danger. On the day the jam breaker was killed, it was such a log jam he had been working on. He pulled out the key log and yelled, "Run!" to warn anyone else who might be working on the piled up logs. As he ran across the top of the log jam towards the shore, he yelled, "Run! The jam is broken!" The jam had moved slowly at first, and then it picked up speed as the water pressure behind it started to rush downriver, shoving the logs ahead of it. Dave, who had been also working on the dam, started running as hard and as fast as he could for the safety of the shore. When he reached the river bank, he looked back to see what was happening. The jam breaker was still on the logs. He was running for shore, but everyone on the bank could see that he was not going to make it. He was being carried downriver and away from its bank with the logs. Two of the men started back to help him, but a large, huge log upended behind him. It rose up to its full length and came down on top of the running jam breaker.